All right, my check 1 2 1 2. No, just kidding. It's Rick Mejia. I'm coming live for one of my first podcasts on my own. I'm gonna try to do this podcast thing. It's not necessarily like trying to copy somebody's style or anything like that. It's just we have to start doing our own podcast because things have changed, guys. You know, we're in a day of communication, social media, transparency. There's a lot of we're connecting in a different way when it comes to our social connections, and people want to know more about you before they do any exchange of values. They want to know what you're about. What do you do? How does it work? What is your credentials? What is your background? What do you believe in? Like nowadays, people are really picky. That's why obviously it's good to just let people know what they should expect and let them know what you're about and what they're dealing with. You know, I've done a couple of videos before. I do them randomly. I never thought I'll be good in videos. I don't think I'm great in videos at all, but some feedback has been great. Like some people have come in and say, Rick, I saw your video on ABC and I thought your video was pretty decent and it got me to come here and understand things better. And for those of you that don't know who we are, Fit Intro Medical is a medical group that we started 5 years ago. I actually started this group when I was very, very young. I was about 24 years old. And part of what I'm going to do in this podcast is kind of explain how I started the medical group and how I got involved and what are we trying to do with it and what is my background on this and how do we try to make a difference. But to come full circle, guys, the idea is that there's two types of experiences I've had so far with doing videos. You got individuals that are super skeptical. They just say, oh, everything you say is wrong, it's bad, makes no sense, you're horrible. Or individuals that and even high qualified individuals, physicians, nutritionists, doctors, psychologists, fitness enthusiasts, individuals that are highly qualified, have seen my videos and say, wow, Rick, that's really, 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 really good information. So I always define myself as someone that's super curious. I'm always trying to learn a new thing, and I'm always trying to debunk anything that I've learned and try to change the hypothesis. But I try to work in a consensus of ideas. If I look at information and I see there's a lot of good consensus from individuals that I find qualified, I'm gonna go for that information. I'm gonna attack it. I'm gonna try to use it and try to optimize it, pretty much, which is what today's world is all about. So part of this first video, it's about introducing myself to you guys, kind of explaining to you where do I come from, what is my background, what am I doing here, why would it be a good idea to work with us, why would it not be a good idea to work with us, and obviously I'll take everything that comes with it. That's part of today's world. You're gonna have people that criticize you, you're gonna have people that love you, but overall you just have to always work to give something that has real good value long term, and that's what we always try to do here. All right, guys, so let me start by saying this. No one is infallible. No one has an absolute truth. Everybody can be debunked, right? But what we can do is we can find a series of different evidence that been presented to us. We find a good consensus, and based on that consensus we can make a rational decision. My background is not in medicine. I'm not a doctor. I never went to school for medical school. My background is first what is called behavioral economics, and then I did something called evolutionary psychology. Most of you guys won't know about that because it's a very new sort of topic. It's just becoming kind of famous. It's starting to hit the internet. But when I started doing it, it was just like a wacky thing to go to school for. But essentially, when you do behavioral economics, is you study how masses make decisions. You study how society makes decisions based on irrational thinking or based on human biases. And what we try to do is understand why they make those decisions and to understand what drives those decisions, right? So when you understand the irrational part of people, you can now design things so people can navigate in their thought process. They can navigate in a way that can make a better decision. So think of behavioral economics as working with, let's say they work with the government in putting better laws so people can perform better or do better. So think about behavioral economics sort of like saying to the government, look, if we give tickets to people for driving fast, we would the amount of people dying in car accidents will go down. And then the government passed that into law because and then the behavioral becomes different based on a law. Well, the same thing can happen in medicine. There's a lot of irrational behavior here. Basically, what I found when I was very young is that there's a disconnect between doctors and patients. The incentive for the doctor is not to make the patient healthy, and the patient has no incentive to make himself healthy at all. So when you have two parties that have no win-win situation, you have two transactions, if we want to call that transactions, that are very inefficient. And what's going on in today's healthcare world is that the patient's getting sicker, the doctor's is not providing the service that he should render. Oops, looks like the light went out. Give me 1 second. Okay, I guess we'll go without the light. All right, so think about this. The doctor and the patient have no incentives to work together. They really don't. If you look at the system, if you look at insurance companies, if you look at pharmaceuticals, if you look at disease, if you look at medical costs, if you look at how hospitals work, there's no incentive, right? So when I was much younger, when I was 24, 25 years old and I was going to school, I had a friend of mine approach me and said, look, my dad is opening he's opening a center that he wants to help basically people in wellness. And during this time, I was just going to school, learning cognitive biases, learning behavioral elasticity, what we call elastic discrimination, things that basically you kind of look at data and look at behavior, and you try to explain to yourself why people make those irrational decisions based on macro events. And I said to myself, sure, you know what? I'm going to college, I'm going to school. Let me go ahead and help you out with that. I want to participate. When I joined that individual, what happened was I realized what a big disconnect there was in the medical field with obviously patients and individuals trying to get healthier. There was a huge disconnect. And the reason there's a huge disconnect, it was because South Florida is very cosmetic, extremely cosmetic. You know, South Florida is one of those places where people are very narcissistic. Their psychology is all about the ego and the selfishness, and they want to show their bodies, and their bodies are a way to peacock. And when peacock, it means the body is a way to sort of use it as a form of status, of higher status, right? But it was never looked at in South Florida. Was never looking at a healthy body from a chemistry point of view, from an inflammation point of view, from a nutritional point of view. So what I've noticed was when I was working in getting this wellness center put together was most people were looking for a quick fix. They wanted a medication, they wanted surgery, they wanted controls medication, you know, things like phentermine. They wanted anabolics. They wanted things that just quick fix. And for a period of time, I started asking myself, you know, why do people want just a quick fix? I mean, you know, once you start understanding how things work within the body, you start understanding the synergy of your chemistry, your psychology, your sleep, your nutrition, your physiology, your biomechanics, your physical activity, your stress cycle, your like, once you start understanding a lot of these things, you learn that people make very irrational decisions when it comes to their health, like work. So they just look for the quick fix. So South Florida was full of centers that basically sell you the quick fix. So when I was participating with this friend of mine in his father building this center, I realized that it didn't give me an incentive. I didn't feel right about it. I felt that it was very, you know, I wouldn't say the word it didn't match the evidence of things that I was reading and the things that I was educating myself on. Because I'm very curious about things. Like, I like to learn things all the time, and I like to look at the evidence and find the consensus on that evidence. And basically, I realized that, you know, clients they were just getting some quick pills and some hopefulness and some medications that might make them feel a certain way. but I wasn't really, you know, I just wasn't attracted to it at all. But I saw the potential. The reason I saw the potential was because we started working with other physicians. And when we start working with other physicians, you start noticing how many people come into practice. What is the obesity rate on that practice? How they getting treated? How many are diabetic? How many high blood pressure? How many are depressed? How many? And you start, like, when you're not involved in the medical field, and you start seeing the massive amounts of individuals dealing with this stuff, and you're like, what the hell's going on here? You start, like a light bulb goes up, boom, and then you start questioning everything about the medical field. You start questioning what's going on here, what is the incentives, why are people doing what are they doing. So for me, it was like, you know, I felt in conflict in the moment, because I felt like I was selling weight loss, and I was introducing weight loss in a way that I just didn't feel 100% that it didn't. I felt like I was kind of, I wouldn't say the word selling snake oil, but I felt like I was just saying what everybody else was saying, like take a fat burner and take this, take that, and, you know, exercise and eat healthy, and then, you know, it didn't sort of, I just didn't feel comfortable with it at first, as far as how the protocols and procedures done for weight loss. So finally things played out. You know, to make a long story short, you know, my friend and his father decided to get out of the business because they felt that it wasn't moving forward how they wanted to. And I asked them if I could go ahead and have the opportunity to purchase the business and take over it and build it from scratch. Thankfully, I had two medical directors that really liked me. They saw a lot of my ideas and they gave me a chance. And they said, Rico, let's do it. And I was able to save some money, make some decisions, and start my practice. So at 25 years old, I started my medical functional health practice, and I changed everything about it. Everything. First thing I tried to do was make it evidence-based. Everything that we did was evidence-based. There was a consensus of ideas and individuals that agree that certain protocols and procedures were better than others. And of course, I had to introduce that to the providers, to our doctors, and have them clear the patients. But they looked at the data, looked at the information, and agree with me that information was very good and very accurate. And we got some really good results. So as I built throughout the years, I started building even more information, and bringing in new talent. We started bringing in individuals like Maria, which is a psychologist. We started bringing in nutrition, a guy, some of you guys might have met him. His name was Brandon. My mom, Maribel, she worked in a detox center for Hollywood for drug addiction for almost 15 years. I brought her on board because if you have issues with drug addiction, you probably deal with later on. If you know how to deal with drug addiction, it can go in parallel with eating disorders or food addiction. So I started creating a team of individuals that can help weight loss from a holistic way, while using Western medicine as an option. And basically, that's how I got started. That was my vision. My vision is, how do I use the biggest tools, the biggest pillars that we know about wellness and we know about functional health? How do I put them together and help them all work together? Help the physician work with the nutritionist, help the nutritionist work with the psychologist, psychologists work with the therapists work, you know, like if I can connect all those individuals, then a patient has so much more chances of being successful, because you cannot change a person's mentality or behavior on a pill. I mean, you can change it, but you can't long term. You just don't. You can manipulate their molecules in the brain and the neurotransmitters, and you can manipulate hormones. But at the end of the day, if they don't have a support system and they don't reinvent themselves, it just doesn't work. And that's why a lot of the diets don't work. The diets don't work because they're short-term, small directions without the idea of you figuring out yourself and reinventing yourself and knowing your body, knowing your chemistry, knowing your gene expression, knowing where you come from, your cultural, like knowing your biases, knowing oneself, right? So putting all these things together was not easy. It hasn't been easy. Still very tough, very complicated, very complex. But we're finally kind of like structuring it together. So for those that are very skeptical about me, I've been credentialed by ACHA, so that means I am licensed to open any medical center in South Florida or in Florida. I am CLIA licensed, so I'm a lab director. I can manage and establish any medical lab anywhere I want in Florida. I am also KION credentialed. That means I've been coached by Ben Greenfield. Some of you guys will know who Ben Greenfield is. He's one of the top biohackers in the United States. He's very well known to train athletes from Olympic and celebrities, doctors, you name it. He's just a really, really, really smart guy that understands the human physiology, biology, chemistry, genetic, all that stuff. And when you get credentialed by him, it means that you have to learn everything about how the human body works. Now, what I do is I have my providers. We have our doctors here. So I don't have to be a doctor, guys. I don't. I have my doctors that are licensed. I mean, they went to medical school. They have the training. But what I try to do is give them all the evidence and try to give them all the different protocols that are out there and try to build consensus with them on what would be the best approach based on this evidence. And what they do with me is kind of say, okay, what are the risk factors for that? Well, how can we manage that, and how can we oversee it and make sure that the patient's risk factor is very low? So when you work with somebody like that, it's very low risk for the patient, because you're working as a team to put these protocols and plans together so they can have not only an idea from the nutritional part, from the medicine part, from the supplement part, from the nutrition, like they have a support team. They have a war room of individuals that can put structured things together for them. And that's very key. That's super hard to do. So most people, when they're trying to lose weight, they're just looking at supplements that they find online, or the fitness guy that's online, or the doctor doesn't know anything about nutrition, or you name it. I mean, they're just looking everywhere. So my goal has been for all my clients to come into one place and begin a process of correcting themselves and reinventing themselves by understanding themselves. Because once you know who you are, you know your body type, you know your personality type, you know your genetic foundation, you know your gut biome, you know your hormone expressions, you know those things. It's easier for you to make decisions about yourself. You know your surroundings, you know your psychology. It's easier to make decisions for yourself. Happening is basically I'm one of my predictions is that mental health is going to get really, really bad, really, 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 really bad. So part of what we're trying to do here is how do we create a platform that essentially, give me 1 second.